Have you ever wondered why all the sweatiest players, streamers, and pros tend to pick Wraith, Pathfinder, and Octane, but you never see them in pro play? Have you ever asked why some legends are popular in pro play, like Crypto and Watson, yet they don't show up in ranked that much? Are you one of the 10 Fuse mains that has been wondering why nobody's picking your legend for the past 8 seasons? Or, if we're talking about the current meta, are you sick of seeing Catalyst walls and you've been wondering what happened? Why is everybody playing this legend all of a sudden? There's a lot of factors that go into a legend's popularity and how often they get picked by the player base. What options do they give the player? How effective are they in a variety of situations? How much fun are they to play, etc.? Well, that's what I want to talk about today. What are those factors? What are those different reasons? How has the meta in Apex Legends evolved over these past 4 years? Kind of a general overview of it. And what can we expect in the future? Now, before we get too far into things, what's up, y'all? My name's Wheaties. I love analyzing this game, talking about why it works the way it does. If you like that sort of thing, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video, hit subscribe, and join the discussion down in the comments below after you watch the video. I also stream on Twitch, links in the description below. You can ask me all these kinds of questions about the meta if you want to over there live. So follow me there if you want to support the stream and catch some of this live. Without further ado, let's just get into it. So when we're talking about what's meta, we first need to define what kind of gameplay we're talking about, because not all of it's the same. Most of you that are searching for this on YouTube are probably here to talk about the meta for either ranked or pro play. Ranked because it's the most common competitive environment that most of us get into, and probably the highest level of competitive play in this game that most of us will ever experience. And pro play because it's what everybody watches on Twitch, if you do watch this game on Twitch, usually. Pro play has a slightly different scoring system than ranked, and it's also slightly different because there's actual money on the line, like people are actually doing this for a living. People play differently when money is involved, and they squeeze out every little advantage they can get. They do all the theory crafting they can get. We're mainly going to talk about those two, but we're also going to talk about a little bit of pubs, like what do people play when there's no stakes and you just want to have fun. So let's start with the history of the pro meta. This isn't going to be an exhaustive history, but there's a couple different phases that we can look at, and we can try to look at the most popular team compositions that have occurred and gone out of style over the past 4 years. It's worth noting that ALGS, which is EA's official professional league, didn't actually start until Apex's second year. So there was a solid year of just random tournaments, one of them being X Games, that occurred before EA made an official standard league. And these were high-profile tournaments. I'm not saying they weren't competitive. I'm just saying the official Apex Legends Global Series did not exist until the second year. It's also worth noting that for the first 6 months of the game, no major tournaments were really happening. The game was just picking up. This means there weren't any major tournaments before Watson came out. So we don't even know what pro play would have looked like before her, and Watson has been a staple ever since she was released. So the first major team competition that we ever saw was Pathfinder, Wraith, and Watson. The picture you're looking at right now is going to show you what legends were already released by this point. Bloodhound and Gibraltar weren't popular pro play picks, despite being options since the start of the game. That's mainly because they were far less powerful back then. A lot of these legends have been reworked since. Bloodhound was almost useless when he was released. Gibraltar is the same way. Watson was way more powerful than she is now, to an overpowered point. And then legends like Valkyrie weren't an option at the time. So a lot of the meta is going to look strange because there were less options available. This Pathfinder, Wraith, Watson team composition was almost the only composition you saw at this tournament. That's how heavily favored it was. So let's start with Pathfinder here. Why was he ever meta? Sure, Pathfinder Grapple is a powerful repositioning and playmaking tool, great for an entry fragger, and zip lines can be good for moving the whole team, but Wraith does that a little bit better, so what gives? Well, at the time, Pathfinder was the only character that could scan for the next ring. Knowing the next ring has been considered extremely important for most of competitive Apex history, really most of competitive Battle Royale history, so your ability to predict the next ring is a huge asset. Creates a huge skill gap between you and the other teams, and it allows you to rotate as early as possible to increase your chances of getting a good spot. You don't want to be the squad trying to fight for a good spot when there's 14 squads left in Ring 4, especially when everybody's basically the same skill level as you. You can't just rely on winning a 3v3, a straight-up 3v3, because these guys are just as good as you. So getting to better positioning faster is a huge advantage in this game. Pathfinder would eventually move out of the meta after Respawn later gave all Recon Legends the ability to scan for next ring, and now all Controller Legends can scan for next ring, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Wraith has made a recent resurgence in pro play. She's still not meta, she's still not a huge staple, but she's more commonly seen because of the buff to her portal, which brings us to the main reason that she was meta in the first place. Her portal at the time was the safest way to rotate your team into a better position. And you probably already know the play. Pop her portal, use your phase as you cross open ground to keep yourself safe, put the portal somewhere good, and your whole team gets to cross dangerous terrain with no trouble. If the portal's no good, you just tell your team, don't take that portal, you just stay there. It's the safest rotate in the game. At this time, her tactical was also pretty overpowered. It's basically a get out of jail free card. You literally just hit the button, you're safe. It was that easy. It was that instant too. But even as that got nerfed, her portal would make her a must pick for multiple seasons to come. And then there's Watson, who is still a very popular pick in pro play today, despite being reworked and nerfed. Her fences are great for taking space and slowing down any pushes that come at you, even when you're holding open space. But there's other legends that can do that pretty well too. Her pylon's probably really the biggest reason that she sees so much play. Recharging your teammates' shields is nice, but the ability to keep yourself safe from grenades is a game changer. Grenades are the number one way that good players will make an opening on a team that otherwise they just couldn't contest. And being able to say, nope, no grenades for you, that's a big deal, and it still is. It also blocks a lot of other tacticals and ultimates, such as Gibby ult, and you might have seen some funny clips of Hal throwing his Seer ult right next to a friggin' Watson pylon and it getting zapped up and him being like, oh. So it can destroy a lot of tacticals and ultimates, but most of her use is out of zapping grenades. So now I've told you that these three legends were meta, and I've told you some of the reasons why, but this also gives us a good chance to talk about what roles legends are trying to fill on a team when they're picked. What is the specific job of each player on a team? The three main jobs that you see on any team, and some people will define these differently, but I think this is a good way to sum it up. You have your entry fragger, your anchor/support, and somebody for rotations. The IGL can play any of these, but these are the three positions mainly that you're playing on a team. Now, an entry fragger is the player who's getting that initial damage, that initial advantage that makes a follow-up play possible. So they're the one that's getting either a knock or some big damage to start a fight, like cracking somebody's shields, maybe two players. Some popular fragger legends at the moment would be Horizon and Valkyrie, because they have access to verticality, they can get superior positioning really fast, and that often makes entry fragging possible. That often catches people off guard and makes it possible for you to get that entry damage. So not only was Pathfinder necessary for scanning Beacon at the time, he was actually the only legend that could grab height, which made him the most obvious choice for entry fragging. It's also worth noting his grapple was like busted on release. It came up way too fast and it yeeted you way too far. It was busted. He's in a much healthier spot now, but you've all seen a Pathfinder that makes crazy plays, and you can see how he would be a good entry fragger, especially in a game that didn't have Horizon or Valkyrie at the time. Now, the anchor support player is the one who makes defending a position or resetting from a fight more consistent. If the anchor stays alive in a fight and someone else goes down, you still have a chance at rezzing them and either finishing the fight or getting out. They're also the one who makes it possible to reset after finishing a fight, so you can be ready for the third party. Now, I want to be clear, even if you play the anchor support role perfectly, you're not always going to be able to reset in a difficult situation. It's not a get out of jail free card. This is just making it more likely that you'll succeed. And in a game like a Battle Royale, really what being good at the game means is managing those odds, managing that RNG. Every little advantage you can get to make it more likely that you win, that's what you need to do to be successful. Gibraltar is probably the most successful anchor support character we've seen in Apex, probably the one that's seen the most play over the past 4 years. Lifeline has seen some limited success recently. Loba's a pretty good fit for this role, partly because she can quickly loot and shield swap after a fight, but mainly because she enables teams to loot a POI much faster and rotate much earlier. Newcastle saw some pretty good play in the past year. He's sort of a budget version of Gibby. His abilities come up much more often because his cooldowns are so much shorter. He can also get to his teammates really fast with his ult, so he was a pretty good anchor support character. He's kind of fallen out of favor, but we did see him recently at the London LAN. Now, at the time of Watson's release, Gibby was hot garbage. I mean, he was bad. Like, you just have to take from my word for it. There was no reason to play Gibby. And most other options like Newcastle and Lobo weren't even out yet. Lifeline was pretty good, but Watson outclassed her pretty well. Watson was the best choice available for this role. Wraith could kind of flex into this role, but Watson was definitely better. Now, this job is very simple. You find a new place for your team, and you get them there. This is why Valkyrie has been almost considered a must-pick in pro play since she was released, because her skyward dive has been such a good way to rotate out of tough situations. But at the time, Wraith was by far the best option for this. Yeah, you could sort of do it with Pathfinder and his zipline and used to be able to jump off of his zipline over and over again, but Wraith was certainly a lot safer. When her portal distance and cooldown was nerfed, we saw Octane sort of fill that role for a brief time, partly because of his synergy with Revenant as well. But Valkyrie is by far the best rotational legend we've had in the game, and is probably still the best rotational legend overall, because she is so versatile. Even though she's not quite as safe as a Wraith portal, she can cross distance and or grab height. Pathfinder sort of fills this role now, but until his buff in Season 16, his zipline was just too easy to beam people on, so nobody would use him for rotations, and it was also a lot shorter. Wraith could also flex as anchor and entry fragger because her phase was instant and could get her out of so many situations. She could also do a really good job of gathering intel. She still can do that, but at the beginning it was a lot more consistent, a lot more powerful. The other role that you have on a team is the IGL, or an in-game leader. But that player can fill any role necessary on the team. There's tons of IGLs that have played Gibby, Wraith, Horizon. For example, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Optic, they used to advocate for Gibby to be the IGL, because being able to anchor a spot and make plays off of that is crucial. You've seen Imperial Howl IGLing from Horizon. You've seen him do it from Wraith as well. Energy Sweet does that fairly often from Wraith. He does it from Valkyrie pretty often currently. I think he plays Valkyrie with NRG on World's Edge. So it's possible to do it from any role. Basically, the IGL is the one that's making macro calls. Where do we rotate? When do we do it? Do we fight for this spot, or do we wait here? Like, basically, what's our next big move? So the Pathfinder Wraith Watson meta was significant for the first year of Apex, but there were a few other pro metas before we reached the mainstays. Crypto was a hit in comp basically the moment he came out, because you could use his drone to scan for beacon and gather information safely. Revenant was actually a really big pick for a little while because his totem used to be a lot stronger. Before, his Revenant totem wasn't so loud, and it didn't have a visual indication of when it was being activated, so it was a lot easier to get a Revenant play off before. Once Bloodhound and Crypto were able to scan beacon, Pathfinder became totally irrelevant. You basically never saw him in pro play. Horizon was big when she was released, then got nerfed into the ground, and then Optic started playing her again, and she really came back into the meta. The next really big meta shift, though, came when 100 Thieves won Pro League with a really revolutionary comp, and that comp was Gibby, Valk, Caustic. Doesn't sound revolutionary right now, but at the time 100 Thieves was the only team playing it, and they dominated ALGS with it. Now, these legends, Gibby, Valk, Caustic, filled the roles of support anchor, fragger rotation, and another support anchor. So 2 support anchors with Gibby and Caustic, and then Valk to handle some entry fragging and to handle rotations. Now, this comp played positioning hard. Caustic would lace up a building with gas, but he was also great at taking space from teams that weren't using Caustic. Valk would skyward dive the team to any position that they needed. Gibby could bubble after they skyward dived to give them time to reset, then they could fight for the spot. Caustic would again be able to take space with his barrels, giving them a chance to fight for that spot. You also might have seen this recently as the comp that Dark Zero used to win back-to-back lands last year. The comp doesn't usually have big, massive wins. Like, it's not one of those comps you're going to see getting 20 kills in the lobby and having a 30-point ALGS game, but it is a very consistent one in gaining placement points. At this time, it also became popular in some regions to play Crypto Valk Watson, and you still see this comp pretty often today. People are still playing that in pro play even now. One thing I forgot to mention about Crypto is that his EMP was and still is the single best way to clear a building of traps. If you need to push a Caustic or a Watson team, just EMP their building, destroy their entire setup in one go. He was also pretty significant in countering Gibby teams, so Gibby teams would often try to fight for a spot by Valk ulting onto it, Gibby bubbling, and then Crypto teams could EMP the bubble and destroy the bubble, and then the team's screwed after that if they didn't pick a good enough spot. Also, stunning the enemy team and hitting their shields is pretty nice, but the main benefit for Crypto in a fight is his ability to totally clear someone's setup, which thus countered a lot of anchor legends. By the way, fun fact, Seer came out during this time. And you know him, right? We're about to talk about that. But first, let's talk about why teams are playing these 2 comps, the Crypto Valk Watson and the Gibby Valk Caustic. There were other comps, but I would say it's fair to say that these were the dominant ones at the time. And the reason was that teams primarily played for placement. Taking a fight was considered very risky as it was easy to get thirded. Most teams preferred to consistently place high, play positioning, get their KP in the end game rather than risk it on a 3v3. Then came Furia, and this is probably my favorite team in ALGS, partly because of their meteoric rise and how they shifted the pro meta and even the basic approach to professional Apex. For those who don't know, Furia was one of the teams that established itself early on as an extremely strong fighting team. You did not want to be caught in a fair 3v3 with these guys because it wasn't fair. It was Furia's fight to lose. That's how good they were. To my knowledge, the roster mainly consisted of Tech, Zeratriki, and Panders for the longest time. About a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years, I'm not totally sure on the timeline, they started to fall off and were not able to qualify for LAN. They had a pretty dramatic drop-off in performance. Their IGL tech was replaced with a ranked grinder and streamer named His Watson, which to this day still does not make sense to me, but I'm very glad they did it for Furia's sake, because His Watson is a huge part of why the meta looks the way it does today. Now, this man came in and said, I really don't know what I'm doing. He was very honest that he did not know exactly what he was doing, because obviously he had very limited comp experience. Comes in and says, I really don't know what I'm doing, but let's try playing Pro League more like ranked, and let's try this really aggressive comp that can run through teams. They specifically geared their comp towards fighting the most common comp at the time, Gibby, Valk, Caustic. They managed to qualify for the ALGS Championship through the last chance qualifier tournament, and would then go on to a second place finish with an absolutely dramatic difference in kills and points between them and the teams below them. They were very close to winning the whole thing, but what's more amazing is that the difference between second and third place, it wasn't even close, y'all. Like, these guys ran through all these pro players. So the comp they played was Valk, Horizon, Seer. You can thank this team for Seer's meteoric rise in comp and ranked. Valk for rotations and fragging, Horizon for more straight fragging, and Seer for sort of anchor support, but mainly information and a little more fragging. So lots of fragging, literally 3 legends that can frag really well. Nobody else is playing this comp last year, and the people that were certainly weren't used to it yet. Like, TSM tried it in scrims, they played it a lot in scrims, and then when things started going south, they switched back to Gibby, Valk, Caustic, I believe. So Furia was the only team playing this super aggro comp, and they took nearly every fight that they could and won nearly every fight that they took. Seer's ult enabled this team to consistently find an entry knock, while his tactical could cancel reses. So Gibby teams would have a player get knocked, they would bubble and try to res, that res would get canceled by Seer, and then the fight's just over. You don't have a chance after that. Just rinse and repeat that with the whole lobby and you're just farming KP, man. After Furia's dominant performance at the Global Championship, this comp became so much more popular in all of the regions. You recently might have seen TSM pilot it to a win at the London LAN, but it's starting to phase out due to some recent legend nerfs and a total rework on legend classes. Now, in one of my previous videos, I talked about why Seer took so long to become popular. On his initial release, he was extremely overpowered, and it got dramatically nerfed. His tactical was a lot wider, it did 10 damage, it basically blinded you, his ult had a shorter cooldown, it was like 30 seconds, like you would literally pop it, and it would be ready during that fight. And he got nerfed pretty heavily after that, which tends to be the case that if Respawn releases a legend or a weapon that is too strong and they heavily nerf it, it doesn't matter whether the legend is still good or not. If they nerf it enough, people will just stop playing it, especially at the pro level. Seer was becoming common in high-ranking console lobbies, but all the pros play on PC, and there tends to be a bias against console players by PC players. So the general consensus was just looking down on them, saying just because it works on console doesn't mean it's going to work in PC ranked, let alone pro play. And they just kind of ignored the obvious success that he was having. There's also the fact that pros in any esport just take a long time to adapt to a changing meta. You see it in every esport, whether it's League of Legends, Dota 2, Rainbow Six Siege, whatever it is. Nobody likes change, and they literally have to be run over by the meta before they'll acknowledge that it's heading their way. I've kind of skipped a couple other popular or notable team comps. So before we move on to the current meta, let's mention a few more of those diverse team comps, because Seer, Horizon, Valk actually ended up being a fairly diverse meta. We did see Bloodhound, Bangalore, Catalyst show up in Europe before the recent rework on classes. I think it was Aurora that would pilot this on Stormpoint primarily. It was a little tricky to get to endgame, but once you got there, Aurora was crazy consistent in winning games. NRG plays Loba, Valk, and Watson on World's Edge. This team hasn't changed since the recent class rework. This would allow them to rotate really fast because Loba would just pop her ult, you get all the cool stuff, and you go on. And then they would be able to anchor down in Godspot before other teams could get there. A few teams would play Newcastle, Watson, Valk, another comp that 100 Thieves pioneered, also at the Global Championship last year. Fun fact, 100 Thieves qualified for finals at that Global Championship by winning 3 straight games in the losers bracket, like starting off the losers bracket before finals with 3 wins on World's Edge, showing some massive consistency. This is a hard positioning comp that they were playing, and 100 Thieves doesn't have a controller player. They never have. So they often play hard positioning and rely on their superior long-distance aim to get knocks, but mainly just keep people off them so that they can continue to control their space. Somebody played Lifeline at some point. I'm pretty sure it was Aurora, but they eventually gave up on that. Lifeline was kind of good because her ult is indestructible cover, so that's nice, and her res can't be canceled by Seer. That was the biggest deal. So I think they thought they could outfight Seer teams with her, but they eventually decided it wasn't really worth it to just hard counter one comp when that's not the only comp that's being played. So then comes Season 16. Recon Legends can no longer scan for next ring. They instead scan for players on the map, which is the same thing that you could do from the Crypto map room on Kings Canyon, by the way. This kind of nerfed Crypto, Seer, and Bloodhound, but not too much. Bloodhound also got a rework, but that's not entirely relevant to this, to be honest. The controller class was created, which gave Watson, Caustic, Rampart, and Catalyst the ability to scan for next ring, thus buffing them. Valkyrie was nerfed by moving her to the Skirmisher class, which meant she couldn't scan for enemies or next ring. She couldn't scan for anything anymore. Some individual legends were also buffed and nerfed, so Horizon could no longer beam people from her lift. Seer's passive and tactical were nerfed, and his ult was slightly reworked. It lasted longer, but the cooldown was also longer. Wraith and Pathfinder's ultimates were hugely buffed, with the intention of making them viable options for team rotations, and at least with Wraith that has been a success so far. Now, these changes, especially the class changes, might seem small, but they were a highly calculated decision to open up the meta to be the most diverse that we've seen so far in this game's history. You remember at the beginning of the video when we asked why Catalyst has become so popular? I made a video about her when she was released, saying that I thought she was average at best. Not a meta-changing legend, in my opinion. Once she was given the ability to scan for next ring, that changed everything. So far, we've talked about how important ring knowledge is in pro play. We've also talked about the 3 main roles that each player on a team fills. We've also noted that the legends that can flex into multiple roles, while still being really good at their primary role, those legends are highly valuable to pro teams. Well, let's compare Catalyst to all the other controller legends, or all the other ring knowledge legends is another way to think about it. She can anchor a spot about as well as Caustic, better than Rampart. Not quite as well as Watson, but not too far off from it. She can take space better than her peers because of her ult, and she can also exert total control over doors, forcing your enemies to break down the door with like 4 kicks. So she's a little bit better at taking a building and taking space in general. Her wall is useful in micro rotations. Her wall also makes it possible for her team to take isolated fights and not worry about getting shot from across the map, which enables her fragger teammates, or even helps her to flex into the fragger role herself by isolating individual players. She does a little bit of everything, and she's actually pretty good at most of it. I wouldn't say she's the best at any of it, but she's pretty good at all of it. And if you've played Counter-Strike or Valorant, her rise really shouldn't surprise you. Smokes and cutting off lines of sight are extremely important in those games. You're literally throwing your game if somebody on your team isn't using them. It's not quite as meta-defining in Apex, but it's still very powerful. The other issue is that Seer's ult works despite Catalyst's wall, so you already have good reason to play Catalyst, but if another team is playing Seer, then it entirely invalidates your Catalyst wall. They can see you, you can't see them. It's costing you your game. So then you play Seer to counter their Seer, because unfortunately the best counter for Seer is another Seer. Then your third option is either Valk, maybe Bang or Wraith to help with those macro rotations. Now the way that I describe it might make it seem like this is the obvious composition to play, but so far that hasn't been the consensus among the pros, and we're only a couple months into it right now, but so far we've seen a pretty varied number of comps. The old Seer Horizon Valk comp has been pretty heavily nerfed, but it's probably still the best edge fighting comp. Some edge teams are using their Recon Legend to see where teams are congregating, since zone teams will rotate early and give you an idea of where the next ring might go. So they've kind of decided that they don't necessarily need a controller legend. Assault legends are really good at the moment, especially since they can improve the team's looting really fast, and they also have great economy because with a lot of weapons, if you're using an assault legend, you only need 3 stacks of ammo now because you can carry more ammo in a stack. Bangalore is really good for rotations and fragging, so a lot of teams are now just skipping Valk entirely and going for Bangalore. The Crypto Watson Valk comp technically got nerfed simply because Crypto can't safely scan for next ring anymore, so it has to be Watson. But this isn't really a huge nerf, so we're probably going to keep seeing this one. Wraith is great for rotations again, and she's also great for entry fragging, so we've seen a lot of teams play her lately. Some people are even going back to Gibby Valk Caustic, which actually got a slight buff with the class changes, since Gibby can access support bins and safely craft banners under his bubble. Some teams are really waffling back and forth on whether or not they should play Valk because we've really gotten used to using her for rotations over the past 2 years, but she continues to get nerfed, and she's probably going to get nerfed in the future as well. Hopefully teams will settle on that in the next few months. What hasn't changed is Seer's prominence in the meta. Real-time wall hacks when you're pushing a building or even defending one are just so strong. But what makes him indispensable right now is the fact that Catalyst doesn't block his ult. Personally, I'm hoping that changes soon. I'm hoping Catalyst's ult totally nullifies Seer's ult just by touching it. I don't want him to totally go away because he has helped make the meta for Apex a lot more aggressive, and actually he's helped make it a lot more varied overall. But at the moment, he's a must pick in lobbies as long as people are playing a lot of Catalyst. Personally, I want to see teams play Catalyst, Bangalore, Horizon more often. The vertical mobility that Horizon offers for the whole team just wins fights, in my opinion. Bangalore is a super versatile pick, and with Catalyst, you then have the option of switching between an edge fighting playstyle and a hard zone style. So it's a very varied comp, in my opinion. And I would like to see people play it more often. It's difficult to pilot, I think, but I think it would be rewarding for good teams that can figure it out. Now, the ranked meta has had a slightly different evolution because it's not just about winning. It's about ranking up. It's about consistently placing high, just like in pro play. But many top players also stream, so they'll play legends that are just fun to watch, like Wraith, Pathfinder, and Octane. Tons of players also just stick to what's fun to play, because in the end, legend choice is really only a small part of the equation. 90% of it is made up by your skill and your gameplay. Regardless of what ranked system has been in place, the general trend has been to play aggressive. Most of these pro comps that are more aggressive have been meta and ranked, but generally ranked has meta legends, not meta comps. Wraith has always been popular because she can play for her team or for herself. If you have a good team, they can capitalize on her portal and your entry fragging, and it's good. If you don't have a good team, you can just run from the fight and rat, which unfortunately is just necessary sometimes when you're climbing ranked, even for Masters players. Pathfinder and Octane are kind of in the same boat. Bloodhound is great for ranked because of his passive right now, but most people prefer to play Scan and other supportive legends when they're queuing with another person because they have confidence in that other teammate to capitalize on what they're doing. One team comp that did become popular for a while and wasn't super successful in comp was Revtane. And if you've been playing for a couple years, you know what I'm talking about with Revtane. The Revtane comp consisted of Revenant, Octane, and Bloodhound. It was especially popular on Olympus, and what teams would do is they would drop a Revenant ult, throw a jump pad down, bounce into a fight in one of those cars that float around Olympus, and just ape a team and try to get an entry knock. Maybe even just wipe the team off of that. It was literally just full send somebody, get a knock, and as soon as you get sent back to the totem, you just pad back in. That's why Revenant's totem is so loud and lights up to let the whole map know it's active right now. That's why it got changed like that, because it was so consistent. Revenant teams were often on top of you before you even heard them. That's also why Octane's pad is so loud now, partly to help nerf this team comp. I don't think you can bounce cars off of Octane's pad anymore, but I'm not really sure on that, so don't quote me on that. Let me know in the comments if you know the answer on that. Most of the legends that you see get nerfed are already popular and ranked, so Horizon's been a problem for multiple seasons now, and so is Seer. People have also started playing more support legends lately, especially Loba, because they think they're going to have a chance to craft somebody's banner later. Let me know if that's working for you guys. That usually doesn't work for me. I've crafted banners like maybe 3 times this entire season. So what about pubs? What's meta there? There's not much to talk about with pubs. It's really just whatever people find enjoying. Whatever they find fun. I mean, there's no stakes, so it's a great chance to see what people just enjoy in Apex. And most people enjoy fighting, so they look for anything that will get them an advantage in a fight. They're not thinking macro, like they're not thinking, I'm going to use Fuse to unseat this other team that's taking the god spot that I want. They're not thinking that far ahead. They're thinking, I'm going to use Octane so I can pad out of a situation or pad into a situation and then use my stim to have crazy strafe speed. Movement legends are all popular because movement is awesome. Movement helps you in a fight. Like, it's fun. Slower paced legends like Crypto aren't very popular, but is that a bad thing? It's really nice to allow everybody to play the game the way that they want to play. Even if your legend choice is kind of niche, it's cool that your playstyle is accessible in this game. Not much to say about pubs, to be honest. What does this tell us about where the meta is going to go in the future, though? Personally, I think what we see from the legends that have been meta and that have been popular, and also what Respawn has decided to release over the past couple of years, we've seen more flexibility in the roles they can play. So Seer can frag, but he's also a great anchor support. Valk is great at fragging. She's also great for rotations. Catalyst is kind of a jack of all trades. Newcastle's a bit of a more varied, more often reliable version of Gibby. I think we're going to see a lot of that in the future. I think there's going to be a lot of legends that are similar to other ones that we've had in the game for a long time that we like, but are maybe shorter cooldowns, less powerful versions of their tacticals and ultimates, but still useful. I think the shorter cooldowns is going to be an extremely popular way to rework old legends, essentially. If you want a deeper dive into the Apex meta and why this game works the way it does, I would definitely suggest that you subscribe for more. Don't forget to comment down below on whatever your thoughts are on the current meta. There's tons of stuff we could have talked about. So feel free to open up that conversation, or maybe talk about where you'd like to see it go. Don't forget to follow on Twitch if you want to catch us live, you want to ask me questions live, and I'll see y'all in the comments.